We were leaving Valentine's dinner, actually. It was February 14th, and it was about 8 o'clock at night, maybe a little later, 8:15. And we were biking down Oak Street, headed east towards the Wiggle from the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood so that we could get back to the mission. And as we were biking down, a couple blocks after we had started on Oak Street, a driver came up behind Joanna, started honking, laying on his horn, then swerved around her and cut her off, was in between us at that time, and then did the same to me, honked on his horn, laid on his horn for a while, swerved around and cut me off. When the driver cut us off was actually on Oak Street in between Divisadero and Scott Street. So traveling east in the right lane in between those two streets. If you look at this from the motorist's view, he was upset because we were taking up space that he thought was rightfully his. Well, that would be the case if there was a designated bike lane on Oak Street. I mean, if there was a designated area for cyclists to take up that was not an area for motor vehicles, that would have prevented this completely. The fact that he had, little regard for my life, for Joanna's life, and also for the law, would not actually really have mattered in this situation because we wouldn't have been vying for the same space on the street. The driver then turned onto Scott Street for whatever reason, and since that's where the Wiggle starts, we both turned onto Scott Street as well. A couple blocks later, the driver slammed on his brakes, and I ran into the back of the vehicle because I didn't have enough time to stop. And he had also swerved over in the lane, so I didn't have room to pass him on the right.
Yeah, and from my perspective, because I was initially the one who was tailing, it was like we weren't doing anything wrong. We were as far over to the right as we could be on Oak Street. And he tailed me very closely, which makes any cyclist uncomfortable when it feels intentional. And we had bike lights on too. So it definitely was antagonistic behavior and just laying on his horn, and then swiveled around me and then swiveled around Ian like he said. And then I just watched them both go down Scott in front of me, and it was just so crazy to see because I kind of saw it from a distance, he was involved, so I'm sure it felt different, but it was just it seemed so intentional that this driver just swerved to the right and slammed on his brake so instantaneously, and Ian had no choice but to just slam in the back. So it was really scary.
So my left hand went first into the rear right side of the car, and then as well the front wheel of my bike, and so that kicked the bike out from under me. And I went down on my left side and dragged on the ground for a few feet on my left hand and the rest of my arm. So my left hand was actually required 3 stitches on my index finger. Both my index finger and my pinky were bruised, but luckily not broken. So after I went down, I got up, and I think there was some altercation between me and the driver. At that point, obviously, I was pretty upset. Basically said, why did you do this? And then the driver sat in his car for about 5 minutes, and then I went back and actually sat on the ground for a while because my hand was actually bleeding quite profusely at the time, and I was trying to keep from making it bleed more. And after a short while, an ambulance showed up, and then a police officer.
It was really cold outside on Valentine's Day, and so I think you went into shock and were kind of shaking too. It was nice, a bunch of cyclists that were also biking by because we were on the Wiggle, so it was a lot of cycling traffic. They instantaneously pulled over, and a few cyclists got in front of the car so that the car couldn't drive away.
One of the things that I think was the worst was the behavior of the officer. When he arrived on scene, I was in the back of the ambulance. They were basically checking to make sure I hadn't injured my head or sustained any really major life-threatening injuries. They were taking my vitals, and they wrapped my finger up in gauze to help contain the bleeding. But the officer spoke to the driver briefly, and then came over to the ambulance and asked me basically what happened. I tried to explain the situation. He kept stopping me and wouldn't listen to what I was actually trying to say. and then threatened to arrest me for reasons unknown.
For vandalizing a vehicle,
Okay.
vandalizing personal property. Because
Yeah.
of course you'd want to use your personal body as a weapon of vandalism.
Yeah, so I guess, he didn't tell me basically why he was going to arrest me, but he threatened to throw me in jail. And I was in the process of, refusing service by the ambulance to take me to the hospital because my roommate had showed up with my car and was going to take me to the emergency room right away. And it actually, the reason why he didn't take me to jail is because I stopped signing the waiver and told him I was going to have the paramedics take me because I needed medical attention at that point, and I wanted to make sure I got that before, having to go to jail. And again, I didn't do anything wrong, but if that's where he wanted to take this, then, obviously I didn't have any choice.
Very actively saying that I wanted to tell my side of the story, and they wouldn't listen to me. There was another cyclist who went right up to one of the officers and said, "Excuse me, I'm a witness. I want to give a statement." And the officer who was kind of taking the lead on the situation told him that, "I don't care what you have to say, go to sit on the curb." And so very actively not listening to anyone on their bicycles. What was interesting is that a number of residents kind of came out, and I don't actually think they saw the incident, but what they saw afterwards was a lot of cyclists getting around the car, mostly to prevent it from driving away. And they viewed this as kind of hooligan behavior, so they actually approached the driver and the cops and said that they would act as witnesses against us, saying that we were acting aggressively.
After more discussion with the driver, the officer came back to Ian saying that the driver was going to drop the charges because the case wouldn't go anywhere.
The second cop, who is not as much of a jerk, I was finally able to talk to a little bit, and he was writing down notes of what I was saying, of where it happened. Didn't care about the driver antagonizing us before the incident, but I finally felt good about talking to him. And then he told me, he's like, "All right, hold on a second, I'm gonna go get in the car, we're gonna move it to across the street to get out of the way, and then I'll give you the case ID number, and then I'll collect the rest of your statement."
They pulled up next to our vehicle for about a minute or so. We were expecting them to then get out and continue on collecting information, and they proceeded to leave the scene.
And both of the officers got in the car and drove away, so they didn't even finish my statement. I was kind of in disbelief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We decided at that time to figure out how to file for citizens' complaints against the officers.
I spoke with the lieutenant who's in charge of the division that's investigating or would be investigating the incident, and to her it basically looks, basically there's too much information on both sides basically for them to do anything. So they would consider it just a traffic incident. And in that situation, they're not actually going to investigate it. They're not going to pursue this. At this point, I have my medical bills and my bike repairs to pay for. I don't think that the driver's car was actually damaged at all. So he gets out of this pretty free and clear. We are, however, going to, once I get the case documents, which I'm still waiting for, I'm going to check and make sure that he hasn't filed a claim with his insurance company, because I want to make sure that they're not going to come after me for, any potential damages to his vehicle. At that point, we're going to file formal complaints against the police officer, Jay Olson, of the Northern Division, who is the one who basically treated us so poorly. In this situation, he should have been impartial and tried to get the facts about the case, and he definitely did not, and behaved in a manner not befitting a public servant at all. It's definitely frustrating. I don't know if you know anything about this, but there was a case in LA recently, I think it was settled last year, where it was almost the exact same situation, where a driver came upon three cyclists who were biking legally in a lane on a residential street. swerved around them, cut them off, slammed on his brakes. It was at higher speeds than I was traveling, so all three of the bikers were seriously injured. And that individual in Los Angeles was actually sent to jail on a full sentence for assault, aggravated assault. So this situation, I think, is definitely similar, not as drastic, obviously, but it's frustrating to see that, there was someone out there who has such disregard for other people who, definitely on a bike, not nearly as protected as him in his car with his airbags and all of that sort of safety equipment, first of all, and then second of all, that, basically the police department that's put in place to, make sure that the law is served and that justice is done, that is partially their responsibility, that they have basically failed in assessing the situation correctly in a way that would provide some sort of legal recourse. In this situation, I don't think I would pursue anything because it would basically have to come from my own standing, and I don't have the money to pay for a lawyer to go after this guy, basically.